to our community workshop tonight, and thank you for joining us. It is our pleasure to have with us tonight Bridget Johnson and Kelly Dean from Enlarged and Enlarged. And they are experts in special ed, and they're going to talk to us tonight about our RVs and how you can, as parents and teachers, respective teachers, as we move forward, how we can participate in those. So, welcome. Thank you. There's more out there that are getting this opportunity than we have it here. I'm Kelly Morrison with Enlarged. I'm Bridget Johnson. Hey guys. So, the first thing that I just like to tell all parents and teachers and everyone that works with Enlarged is speak, and that's easy to everyone. So, like what are all these acronyms? Almost like our for parents. So, I think you should have the materials and the guide. I would just encourage you to use that. Take it with you for all. Know that everyone at the table might have the same question you as a parent. Don't feel silly saying, what did that mean? You just said that. And I don't know what that means for, you're talking over my head a little bit and just slow everything down for this. Just make sure you all understand what's being said at the table before you get confused. Is this better? Okay.
So when you're in an ARD meeting, I would also encourage you to remember that you are there representing your child, and we are happy to have you. We want you to be having a conversation with us. It is about the parent and the district coming together and reaching a consensus on a plan for your child. And we want never to forget that it's about your child. So please don't feel like you ask a question and it takes our time or that it is an inconvenience, because everyone sitting at that table is absolutely focused on your child. So please engage us and let us explain to you what we are thinking for your child, and then also please give us your thoughts, because you are your child's best advocate. You'll notice that there are links in your handout that are about procedural safeguards, ARD guides, different things like that. And sometimes those are good to look at because we do try very hard to simplify what should be just a conversation. There's a lot of legal jargon and a lot of legal hoops, which I would tell you we try to speak to what your child needs. And I think sometimes these guides help you to, one, prepare how it's going to go or specific areas that you're concerned about, but also kind of walks you through it with less pressure. We know that you sit around the table and think we're all staring at you and you're staring back at us. And that is not how we want it to be. We want it to feel like a conversation.
So as part of the special education process, when you're new to it, your kiddo is going to be evaluated to see if they're eligible for special ed. And so we have 45 school days to complete an evaluation and write that report, and then 30 calendar days, which gets very confusing, to go to an ARD meeting to discuss that report and determine eligibility and make a plan. So 45 school days, just because people get confused sometimes about work day is school day, or only student day school days, or anytime there's somebody in the building, there's a school day. So the school day is really the days that the students are in class. So, so you can see the evaluation time period can take a little over 2 months. And then by the time you have 30 calendar days to go to an ARD meeting, potentially you're talking about almost a semester just for that process. It's incredibly important that we take our time and do a thorough job so that we make the best plan possible. If we rush that evaluation process, we won't know everything that we need to know to make the best plan for your child. So it's time well spent
when we take the time to do it correctly. So you now have a sample agenda. That is very overwhelming. Many times we have that sitting in front of you simply so that the parent can know the flow of the meeting. Do not feel like you can't ask what that means. Know that we have a lot of things that are required language. I always apologize when I have to read something to a parent, but there are actually parts where we have to read it verbatim. But again, remember that although the sample agenda looks crazy complicated, it's really just about your child and making sure we address every need, every strength, every weakness, and that we have a good plan going forward.
So sorry, I'm backing up on our evaluation timeline. What determines the start of the 30 calendar days? What is that timeline? That's a common one we get.
So the 30 calendar days start from the date of the report. So if we get finished with the evaluation report sooner than 45 school days, it's not 30 days from 45, it's 30 days from the date of that report. And there have been times, especially with COVID, I would just say that we have missed the evaluation timeline because students were not able to be in front of us to be evaluated. And we've done our very best to still get to the R table on time, or as darn close to on time as we can, because really that's when services start. So eligibility for special ed is a two-pronged question. And sometimes people forget about the second prong. So it's really important. A child has to first be found to have a disability that falls within one of the 13 eligibility categories, and by reason of that disability needs special education and related services. So sometimes we'll find kiddos who have a disability, but the only service they need is a related service. Like the only thing they really need is PT, physical therapy. But if they don't need specially designed instruction outside of that related service, they're not eligible for special education. They certainly might be eligible for 504 accommodations, but not for special education. So typically, the need for special education is evident, and that's the reason there was a referral, but that's not always the case.
So here you have the 13 eligibilities under IDEA. And so those are very specifically outlined in the law. I would tell you that OHI is one that is wide and deep. So when we get there, there's a lot of things that fall under that. But when you're thinking about IDEA or disabilities where you qualify for special education, please know that there are 13 that are defined. When you get into what I call my side gig, which is 504, it is a little more gray, for lack of a better word. You don't have specific 13 categories. You look at the disability and you determine if it's impacting a life activity. And if it is substantially limiting, then we look at accommodations.
So in the grand scheme of things, what is special education? What sets it apart from interventions, from 504, from all of the other ways that kiddos get help in school? Because they do. Kiddos get help in school through Title I programs, through intervention programs, through general ed, all kinds of things. But what sets special education apart is that it is the specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of the child with a disability, and that is straight out of the law. So specially designed instruction is really whatever the goal says it is. We're gonna say, here's the goal that this child most needs. If we really worked on this, it would make all this better, right? And so that is the specially designed instruction. And so other kids who have intervention time, it just is not as honed in on what we're gonna track with progress.
Then we have related service, which of course Kelly talked about earlier. And these are things that we need to do in addition to just the strictly educational, academic focused goals and objectives. There are things like transportation, at times it's occupational therapy, it's physical therapy, it could be vision therapy, or not therapy, but different related services that you need to then access your education. So that is a little bit different, and at times that can look different for each child. We just have to look at how impactful that need is, and if it needs to be addressed so that they can be educated and access their education in the public education environment. So those things come alongside in support and then also help children grow.
And this is my favorite word in all of the law, or it's actually an acronym, PLAF, because it makes us all sound like we need speech therapy. So the PLAF is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. In my time as a special ed director, this is my 23rd year, so I'm old and haggard now. This has been called the PLOP. It has been called competencies. It has been called lots of things, but our current definition is PLAF. And I think that PLAF is probably our best definition of what this was really supposed to be. Because it does remind us all that it's not just academic. It's not just your current competency in reading. It's also your functional performance in reading. Like, can I pay attention? Can I turn my assignments in? Because all of those things relate to how well I end up doing in reading. So I do, although I do make the word or the acronym, it really is the best descriptive one for what this is.
In transition, so when we get to students who are a bit older, the law says that we start in addressing what those needs are going to be as we look beyond high school. For our students that are going to be 14 or at 14, we have to start that process. That seems very early for some of our parents. They're like, why are you talking about this in intermediate for Ken or junior high, middle school, depending on where that falls? But the reality is we start very simplistically and then build upon that. The transition is one of those times when we spend a lot of time talking to the student and figure out what they're wanting, what their goals are, as well as the parent. So know that although that may seem early, it's really not. Never been a parent, you know, time flies. And so when we are starting that, it does start simply. So don't be afraid of the word transition. Know that we're looking and we want to make sure that we've had our eye on the goal, which is to have them be productive, active adults in our communities in every way. And so if we start early at 14, then we're usually ready by the time they walk out of our doors. If we start any later, I can tell you it's really hard to make those good concrete goals about what they need to know, how they need to know it, how they use it and implement it in their daily lives. So I know that seems like a little bit of a stretch, but for us, we feel like it gives us a nice framework of time to help students truly be ready for what we call real life.
I'll just tack onto that and say, for general ed kiddos, at 14, you're typically in 8th grade, and you're looking at what classes you're going to take in high school. And with our career paths, if we don't start that conversation at 14, we'll be too far behind to get kids in the right classes to be where they want to be when they're 18. So it's a good age. It's more in Texas. The federal law would just have you start at 16, but Texas says 14, and I think that's a benefit to our students. So our goals, when you go to an ARD meeting, the district should be proposing goals. And I would love it. I can't even tell you how much I would love it if parents always got goals ahead of the ARD so that they could look over them. I know realistically that doesn't always happen. But they should be written so that you can clearly see what should happen. So there should be a timeline. And lots of people feel like in 36 instructional weeks. I personally prefer something that just says by this date, which would be the day before the ARD would be due next year. Because I'm not sure whether we count the 2-day week at Thanksgiving as an instructional week, and I don't know if we count the 3 days of ski break or whatever your district might have. Is that an instructional week? I don't know. So the date's easier for me. But there's really no definitive way that you have to say the timeline, but it has to have a time. And then we should have a condition. So using what? Because that really is the descriptive part of how I'm going to interact with your child to create the specially designed instruction or the behavior I want to have the outcome of. So using a calculator, using
teacher directed, using perhaps an alternate curriculum, maybe prompts and cueing, and just whatever it is that we're doing that's individual for Kelly versus Bridget. Because we might both need to have the same behavior. We both need to be able to read a third grade text. But what you have to do for me to get me there versus what you might do for Bridget could be very different. And this is where the difference is. And then the behavior says what I'm going to be able to do. When you interact with me in that way, when you provide me with a calculator, when you provide me with leveled text with highlighted keywords, whatever the case may be, then you're going to expect me to be able to fill in blank. And typically that blank that's filled in is a T. It's out of the curriculum that all kids are learning. And then the criteria says, and when we do this, and Kelly's able to do this at 3 out of 5 trials, 75% correct in each of those, that's when we think that Kelly really has mastered that. So it should have a timeline, how we're going to interact with the student, the behavior we want to see in the student, and then what we consider mastery. So in a general ed kid, when you think about mastery, evidently it's 70%, because that's what's passing, right? But in a special ed student on these goals, we're really honing that into what would really be mastery. Because when you think about it, if I'm working with a child with a visual impairment and I want him to safely cross the street, 70% is probably not good enough my criteria. That needs to be 100. But I also shouldn't over expect the child with a disability to outperform the general ed peers on a reading assignment to consider that they've mastered the curriculum. So, and we can adjust the criteria as to what each child makes it most appropriate for them. Say that Kelly used one of our favorite acronyms, TEAS, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And so you can find those are listed. TEA has every one of those in a way listed on their site for every subject matter. Goes all the way from what we call EOCs, or in course of all the way down to the prerequisite of pre-K. So if you were talking physics, algebra 2, it's everybody does algebra. And you needed to go down to pre-K level for Bridget. It would knock you all the way down and show you something that is directly correlated or in line with your goals for algebra 2.
If parents don't receive draft IEP goals prior to the ARC meeting, what options do they have to review the proposed goals outside the meeting?
So if they don't receive them before, you can always they should be talking about them in the meeting. So the reason that we do that is so they have time to look at it. But if for some reason they don't get them, we go through them in the meeting. And they can be adjusted in the meeting. So please remember, anything that is sent home is a proposed or draft, as we like to call it. So it's not determined until we sat in the meeting, discussed it, and then agreed upon.
You. And then we had a second question. How often related services, counseling, for example, are used in either district? So I think this was specific to provision of services in like Canyon ISD or Merlot ISD.
Are you asking how often something like that would be?
Yeah, so like estimated frequency of delivery of services that are related services. I think this individual is specifically alluding to like behavior support or counseling support.
And those are always by the student. We just look at how often they need to be seen or worked with. And so that is a very particular question to each student. There tend to be not habits, patterns of we may see them every other week, or we may see them, once a month. But those are usually following something where we're either working really diligently on something or just need to see if there's carryover and using in the classroom or things like that. So it just depends on the student and what service and where they're at in their application, maybe is the word, of those services.
I'm sorry, the number 501.
Oh,
And then at this moment. Are there any district available resources or trainings to educate parents regarding their child's specific?
I would say we don't do like big trainings because if I'm talking to you about your child's specific disability, you know, if you happen to know one child with autism, you know one child with autism. And so the best training that I can think of for a parent is to schedule an appointment with the diagnostician or the school psychologist and really look at that, the FIE, the full individual evaluation, and really look at how this disability impacts this child. Because I can tell you that someone is learning disabled in reading, and that could mean many different things. So to do just a big general training is really not as beneficial to the parent as that individual consultation. So a goal example is like by the end of the 21-22 school year, using a calculator and oral administration of a written problem, Kelly will solve word problems involving 2- and 3-digit addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division at 70% mastery in 3 of 5 trials. Goals should sound something like that. They're not all that lengthy, but you have the timeline by the end of the 21-22 school year, the condition of using a calculator and oral administration of a written problem. And then what I will be able to do, the behavior, is I'll solve the problems at 70% mastery in 3 of 5 trials. Because we don't want to just say 70% mastery. What if I did that one day? Is that really mastery? I need to be able to do 70% mastery multiple times. Huh? Well, you wouldn't have if you didn't get 70 in each of them. But what I would, because of the and. But what I would say is if I was able to master it in everything but division, then probably the next year's goal would be more specific to division. We would pull that out and work on it further. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do y'all mind summarizing your takeaway?
Oh,
without the mic.
Yes. So the question was, because it's multiple things. It's in 3-digit addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. What if we were at 70% in addition, subtraction, and multiplication, but not in division? And so that being the case, we would not have mastered the total goal, and probably the following year, our math goal would need to address division specifically. Oh, we're back to the word class. Okay, so I am going to take this a little further back because this slide talks about should it be the goals be derived from the plat, and the simple answer is yes. But what I would tell you is think of it as a continuum of you've got your evaluation, your FIE, your full individual evaluation. That should drive talking about that takes and looks at what your current performance is. If the FIE is brand new, then that's where everything comes from, right? Because that is your current information. But you also have that sitting there, and if a year later, then you have where they are currently, that's your plat, right? And from those strengths and weaknesses, then we pinpoint the weaknesses or the areas that we know are critical for that student to make progress. Those become the goals. So think of that relationship of all 3 of those pieces of information driving and arriving at what your student needs so that they're ready to move on and grow as an academic or in all life skills areas. So I will say that. And the one other thing I would tell you is at times we do break down the goals into objectives. Those can either be shorter term, or you could have broken down those areas like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Those could have been separate objectives underneath leading up. A lot of times when we're talking objectives, we look at that as stair steps to get to the goal, especially when you're thinking of a student that may be at 10%. You really don't want to say that your goal is going to be 20% by the end of the year. So you may say, in the first 12 weeks, we want to get to this. And then the next 12 weeks, we want to get to this, getting closer and closer to the ultimate goal. Sometimes we do that. It just depends, again, very specifically on the child.
So report cards and IEP progress reports, I think this is confusing to everybody. So report cards go out to every student, right? Like depending on how your campus or district does it, every 9 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, just depends. They're given to everybody and they reflect mastery of the curriculum. So that is all of the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills for that grade level or that subject. An IEP progress report is only given to students who have an IEP, so only students in special education, and they reflect the progress on those goals. So it is possible that you could not be doing well in a class, the breadth of the curriculum, but still be making progress on that goal. And so that can be very confusing for parents to get one piece of paper that says, yay, making progress, and another piece of paper that says he's barely passing. How can that be? It can be. And so at the point that the overall grade, the report card that everyone gets, when we get to a point where a kiddo is just not being successful to the point that we think that they might not be passing for the year or something like that, we will come back to the table typically in an ARD meeting and say, what else do we need to be doing? Do we need additional accommodations? Do we need a different curriculum? What is it that we need to do to help this kiddo out?
Accommodations. This is a very exciting word. Oh, did you have a question? So sorry.
Participant question asking, this is a good one for our prospective teachers. Who is responsible for documentation of progress on the IEP? The classroom teacher, the special ed teacher? They even went so far to ask, what if the student is in DAP for a time period?
So it would be all of the above. No, actually, well, yes, that's true. But I will give a better answer. The better answer is, one, it's lined out in the IEP. Who's going to be reporting on what, whether it's a grade given by a special education teacher or a gen ed, or if it's joint. So it'll be lined out for that. When they are in a different placement, then you have a special ed teacher there and a gen ed teacher. So they follow the same pattern of whatever you have said or outlined in the original line or art. Okay, accommodations. So this becomes a little more interesting because this is a very individual conversation, and Kelly wrote, it should not be a one list. I do agree. And we try and stay away from, well, maybe, sometimes. These are things that are required for this child every time so that they can be successful. And these are things that give them not an advantage, but what they need to be successful. Whether that's that their notes are given to them after the lecture so that they can have a good, complete set of notes because they struggle with writing it down. Maybe it's that things are that they highlight instead of rewriting. There are a lot of different accommodations that can be done. Maybe that somebody comes over and checks and reads the question to them, especially in, say, a math setting where they have a reading disability, so that that doesn't impact their math instruction, that they have difficulty reading. So these are things that we do to help them, again, access their education, but it does not modify the content. So those are very different things, and they're a challenge every day to kind of work to find the right balance for each student, because every student we want to be pushing appropriately, but yet supporting successful. So those are always kind of in coordination.
It is a hard one, and it is hard because you can have an accommodation, and depending on how you've used it, you've modified. And so accommodations do not change what is being taught or what is being expected. They might change the delivery method of how a child responds, but they don't change the what is being taught or what is being expected to be learned. A modification can change what is being taught and what is expected to be learned. So, I'll use a calculator. At some grade levels, a calculator is an accommodation. But in grade levels where I'm learning to add 1 + 1, a calculator has modified the curriculum because it's given me the answer. I don't have to learn. I have to learn how to use the calculator and don't have to learn what 1 + 1 is. So it can be a little bit tricky. So next you have placement options, and some of these we customize. Amarillo and Canyon call our classes different things. So general ed is a placement option for everyone, and that is where the discussion starts. We always start with general ed. It is the least restrictive environment. There are times when students have to be taken out of the general ed environment in order for us to hone in on really specific things that a particular child needs to learn. So my eyes are old now and I can't really see this, but so in general ed, students could get in-class support or external support. So some kiddos need an actual person in the class with them to help them. Some only need the papers or the assignments to be adjusted ahead of time, and they don't really need the person there. So that's an external support versus someone being in class with them. And then we have special ed environments. We have resource, which is very typical. That's, I think, what everybody calls it too. And then we have ACC, and Canyon calls it TLC. And all over the state of Texas, you would have people tell you that that's a life skills classroom. We're going to be teaching the academics in a functional way. So I'm not just going to teach you percentages. I'm going to put that in terms of buying tires. And I could either buy 3 get 1 free, or I could get them 25% off. Is it the same, or is it not? The kind of more functional things. And then in Amarillo, we have base classrooms. Those are classrooms with behavioral support. And in Canyon, they have behavior support on our base classrooms are at centralized campuses. In Canyon, they have just behavior support on every campus versus a specific classroom. And then in Amarillo, we have medically fragile classrooms where we are staffed with RNs, and they're separate from our ACC, but in Canyon, the medically fragile kids are in the TLC. And then in Amarillo, we have TAC, that stands for Transition Achievement in the Community. And in Canyon, that is called Discovery. So that is a program for 18+ kiddos who have finished their curriculum and credit requirements for high school. I assume yours is the same way, but still need some IEP goal work. So they might be working on vocational skills or independent living skills, but they finished Algebra 1 and English 4 and those kind of classes. And then we both have early childhood special education classrooms. That's for our 3 to 5-year-olds. And then vocational opportunities, internships. We have a program called CJET in Amarillo. That's community job exploration training. So there's vocational is pretty broad because it could be very different for every child, how we set up an internship or a shadowing experience or something like that. So those are if you come to an ARD in one of our districts, the kind of classes that you might be talking about when you get to that schedule of services, you might hear those names.
State assessment options. All are called STAR, so twinkle twinkle. At the moment, they've been called many things, but we have STAR that is with or without accommodation, and then we have STAR alternate. I would tell you a very small percentage of students take the STAR alternate. This is when they truly learn in a different way with either communication device or things like that, that they come at it from a different angle. Most of our students all take the STAR, and then you also have STAR online with accommodations. It gets a little bit wild, I shall say. Would you say? Yes. But the state of Texas, we will take STAR. That's the end of that story. And that's where they stand.
Everyone will take star of some kind in public education. So when we get to adjourning our meeting, we are looking for consensus, and that is a confusing word for everyone as well. And I will just say it is not voting. People like to think it's voting. It is not. It is consensus. And so I called it, I have this little strategy called fist to 5, meaning fist is 0, like I do not agree with this. There's no way this plan can help this child. Y'all are crazy. To 5, like I cannot believe we came up with this. This is the perfect plan, and you are the perfect people to implement it. And so I think if we can all get to a 3, like maybe there are things that I wish were a little different, but for the majority, I can see how this could benefit the kid if it works, if we all try our best. And at a 3, we're all willing to try our best. If we get there, I feel like we're in consensus. We might have a lot of work to do, but we're not against the plan to the point that we're going to undermine it. And we're not overzealous, like thinking, I don't really have to work to make this plan work. The plan will work on its own. So anywhere from a 3 to a 5, I feel like we're in consensus. And it's just important for everybody to know that at the end of the day, the 2 people who have to come to consensus are the administrator and the parent. However, we need the rest of the team to get to consensus. We need everyone at that table to be on board with implementing this plan to the best of their ability to benefit the student.
Several prospective diagnosticians viewing this
Yay.
evening.
Yes.
And so the question would be, I'm sure. Well, I bet you both do. No. What recommendations do you offer to the IEP or ARD meeting team to reach consensus? And this could be strategies that you recommend prior to the meeting and even during the meeting.
Well, one thing I would tell you that we always talk about is listen, ask questions. Why do you think that? I think many times we assume we know why someone is asking for something instead of asking them why. Why do you see that as a need for your child? What is going on? Help me understand, and then let's figure out if that's something that we're capable of doing in the classroom or if that is something that we can't. I don't know. Beyond that, I would tell you asking questions even beforehand. We call parents, or many times parents will say, I'm going to be asking for this, or I really want this, or I think my child needs this something. And so we'll say, again, tell us what that is. Let us come to the table and talk about it. The other thing that I would encourage everyone to remember is we don't have to make a decision that day. We can recess. We don't like to recess because that is difficult for scheduling, but that's an adult problem. That's not about the child. So many times we have to just say, well, we're going to come back and we're all going to be here and we're going to think about it. But it gives you time to go research, make sure it's the good choice, the best choice. There's even times when we said, okay, I understand what you're wanting, but we don't have data on the table that tells us that. Is there a way that we can gather data for 12 weeks or 6 weeks about whether that truly is needed, required for them to access their education and grow as a student, or is that something that maybe they don't need? Is there a way for us to truly understand if that's required or needed? Those are some of my thoughts.
I agree with everything Bridget said. And then sometimes I think it's easy if you're using that fist to 5 method, or we have cards for anybody in enrollment that's come to my trainings that start with like dark green to light green to yellow to orange to red. And everybody can put where they are in front of them on the table. And then we can look at the person who's a red or an orange and say, what would it take to get you to yellow? What is it about this plan? I'm not asking like everything you need to get you to dark green, but what would it take? What are 1 or 2 things that if we incorporated those, if we changed the wording on the goal, if we changed, the placement decision or something, like what do we need to talk about to at least get us to a point where we can all move forward? Because if the plan doesn't work, we're going to be right here at the table again. But we have to get to a place where we can start the plan. And when the adults have these disagreements and we're just sitting in kind of a limbo, it's really the student who suffers because we aren't starting on something to get them going in the right direction. So that's just an easy kind of visual around the table, particularly if you know it's going to be a difficult art going in. There are methods through TEA. You can have facilitators come out. I will tell you that's not necessarily pleasant for anybody, but they will do it. There are sometimes people in the district that are really good meeting facilitators that aren't necessarily involved in that student's education, but can still help move the meeting discussion along. And so I think all of those things are helpful. And really, if you have something that you're adamant about, like, let everybody know ahead of time. This is what I want. This is what I think will help, and be prepared to talk about that.
Question about any like a system for the report art documentation, like what is the name and how, like, because there are pre-service teachers who will be teachers soon. So can you describe the name and what training do you provide for the new teachers to record their data on the system? And if you have any kind of school-wide system to record student performances, any state data or progress monitoring data, if you provide any kind of those structures.
Don't necessarily use any specific program to do data. It's really about the students. Now, there are lots of things that we do district common assessments to know where they are. Like, we have a lot of information, but when you get down to a discussion about an individual student, that's a whole nother matter. And although I love big tests, I would tell you, when you're talking about an individual student, that's when I would talk about data. It's really having the teachers that work with them, the parent that knows them, talking about what would that be, where are we, what do you see? What we find many times is that that even varies among settings, right? At home, he may do this, but in the math class, he may do this, and in ELAR, he may do this, and then at PE, it's a whole other matter, right? So it gets a little bit convoluted or confusing, and I don't mean for that to be a non-answer, but just know that when I talk about that, what I mean is, what does that student, again, we're putting the student in the middle of the table. What do they need, and do we really know what that is? Is there a way to know exactly what works, and is there a way to build that into the problem solving?
One thing that we do use is in our system where we write the full individual evaluation report, in the system where we write the goals, in the system where we have the art, there are data collection sheets. So you can print off, like, here's the goal, and then on that data collection sheet, you can have, on this date, this trials, here's the data. Certainly we have a lot of teachers who use those, and when we have new teachers and we do our new teacher training, we show them those and show them how, where they can access those. We don't require that they use those, but we do have them and show them where. And then I will just say, depending on what the student is involved in. So let's say that we have a kiddo who's in special ed and is also in the state dyslexia program. Our state dyslexia program has natural evaluations and progress reporting in it. If you're in special ed and one of the programs you're doing is Imagine Learning, then that has natural progress checks. And so just depends. IXL is another program that we use, and it has progress checks. So it kind of depends on each kid what they're being taught with. Some of those will have those natural reporting features in it, and some of them we've built into our systems. And then on the specific goal, many teachers use that data collection sheet. Okay, so we have some helpful websites. So if you have the electronic version, the legal framework, I always joke about this because special ed is so tied to legalities. But really, if you just try to read that, it is wonderful bedtime reading if you're having trouble going to sleep, because it's just like reading the law. There's nothing exciting about it. There is, on the TEA website, there's a special ed A to Z with just topics that is actually, for me, a lot more, I can get more in depth, I will say that. And then the Region 16 special education page has upcoming workshops and all kinds of things, all kinds of information there. So some helpful websites for you. That's it. And then I think you have another, oh, sorry.
Okay, I have parents that have come and asked me. The ARD meeting went great, and the accommodations were put into place, and everybody was happy, and they were put into place, even been in the classroom, and then they kind of trailed off a little bit, and then all of a sudden there were no accommodations being used there, and they wanted to know, what do I do if they visited with the teachers? So they kind of wanted to know their rights as to, can I call another ARD back or what? So
I will say you can always call an ARD. I will also tell you that unless you want to change something in the ARD, if you want different accommodations, you need to have an ARD. If you just want the ARD that you've already had enforced, you need to talk to the teacher and principal. And that can be done as a parent-teacher conference, and I will tell you that can happen a lot faster than calling an ARD and the notice and the whole rigmarole. So typically, you know, I don't ever like to hear that happens, but if it does, sometimes it's because we've had a change in teacher, or teacher's been out on extended absence or something. And so I would just say a phone call to the campus, talk to that administrator, to the teacher, and just say, hey, I'm not seeing this happen, and let them address that. Because you just, unless you want to change what's in the ARD document, having an ARD doesn't make it happen in the classroom.
okay, I have a question about to be in special ed, part of the definition is specialized instruction. If a child is in 504 and in the dyslexia program, why is that not specialized instruction?
Okay, so because in the state of Texas, we have a general ed dyslexia program. So if all you need is the general ed dyslexia program and some accommodations, that's what 504 is the accommodations and the general ed state dyslexia program. What we have found in Amarillo is that the majority of our kids who need the state dyslexia program and accommodations also really need external or internal in-class support, and they are in special ed. We have seen our numbers in the last 4 years go from about 9% in special ed to 14%. And it is a majority of those kids are in dyslexia programming with additional special ed services. So it's really a state of Texas, a weird thing that I think is changing as we speak, actually.
One thing about that also is sometimes I do think that process may be a little bit of what we call the least restrictive environment, that we're trying to do just what they need without changing everything. And if we find that the dyslexia program, whatever the district's chosen to use, is not meeting their needs, then we come back and layer up, and that's where we may go from 504 to special education. So I do think there's a progression there a little bit in the level of need. Sometimes we really hesitate to throw everything there because we're not really sure. And so a lot of times, even though we have this really in-depth evaluation document, we're not sure how they're going to respond and how much they're going to need from us. So I think sometimes we look at that. I am with Kelly in that I do think a majority of students that are specific learning disability with condition of dyslexia just rolls off the tongue. Yes, exactly, which is changing as we speak. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see what Texas says. But anyway, I would just say that sometimes we look at that as a continuum of how much do we think they need. Like I always say, an ARD meeting is our best decision today. And we got to be honest about that and know that we may find that tomorrow it was not what they needed, right? And we're come back. It is a task to come back, right? Because there are a few people, but at the same time, I would just say we know that we're going to make our best decision and that we're going to always come back to the table. So that may impact how we serve them. I'm not always sure, but that's where our best thinking is.
I can tag onto that just a second. And sometimes we also have kids who have completed the dyslexia curriculum. And so they still have dyslexia. It's not something we cure, right? But at that point, the only thing they need are accommodations. If that's the case, then they no longer need special ed. They just continue to need those accommodations. And so those kiddos are 504. So it can happen a variety of ways. But like I said, we're seeing the majority of our kids who have dyslexia and need the state dyslexia program are also needing other things. There's, comorbidity of ADHD, there's all kinds of needs that we need to address beyond dyslexia.
Thank you. So I think top question is very important, and also it's really question across countries, for example. So in South Korea as well, and also in a global way, right now we discuss those spectrums. Some countries really don't hold Section 504, but there is some areas it's covered under the special education who are at risk of or have difficulties but do not really gone through the full evaluation yet and do not following disability category or do not get services yet. So I'm just wondering, student who has been receiving dyslexia program somehow or other students at risk of any certain difficulties, but still in general education classroom, how often those students are identified or referred to the special education? How long does it take until they are really get referred or somehow they get support? Can be really open answer, but I just wondering how those procedures will really transparent or how it really is good from, and also they get the education they want.
Probably the simplest way to explain that is right now what we call MTSS, multiple tiered systems of support. And that is truly special. That's general education. And we're looking at the whole child. So we could be looking at academic needs, we could be looking at behavioral needs or emotional needs. And in that process, one, the parent is informed and knows, okay? And we are targeting or we're looking at supporting a very specific thing, but it's very early on. There's not an FIE, there's not an evaluation behind it. It's just what we see in front of us or what the parent has many times brought to us, that they're worried about this, they're worried about that. They see this concern at home, it's taking longer to read, things like that. So we respond much quicker there, and we do progress checks to see how they're progressing. And so then through that, depending on if they're not progressing, we look at a referral or something of that nature. To ask a timeline, there is not. Like we don't have to do MTSS to decide that we're going to do a referral for special education. I will tell you, sometimes it's very good information because then it tells us, because the way that's structured is we may have 1 to 5, we may have 5 children to 1 teacher, or we may have them all the way to what we would call a tier 2 or 3, which is 3 to 1, 3 students to a teacher. And that gives us a lot of information about how intense and intentional we're being and whether we're seeing the progress. But to say that we have to do that process is not true at all. But I do think it helps us know the depth of difficulty maybe, and make sure that we're not jumping to a referral, because again, although we talk about it like it's every day, it's all we talk about, it's a big deal. And we should always respect how important that decision is, and that it is not something that goes away. And so we need to be very careful and mindful of the seriousness of that, and not jump to something without knowing what that is.
I would just say kids should be referred either by their parent, teacher, whomever. In Amarillo, our MTSS is called ASSIST. That's Accommodation, Student Supports, and Intervention Team. And so whether those referrals come from a parent, from a teacher, from the ASSIST team, students should be referred to special ed at the point that we have the suspicion that they have a disability and a need for specially designed instruction. And that can happen at the same time we're implementing the MTSS plan, or it could happen after we've implemented that for a while and it's not making the progress we'd like to see.
Question come through the chat, and I think that's what we'll have time for. They asked, could a student younger than the age of 14 be involved in an ARD meeting? And if so, what might that look like?
Anytime that a parent would like their child to be involved in the ARD meeting, we would be happy for that to happen. I think it's really great for kids to be there, to understand as much as they can about what is going on with the way they learn, so that they can self-advocate for what they need, whether that's in a middle school classroom, a high school classroom, or a university classroom. If we don't teach our kids how to self-advocate, then they're always reliant upon the kindness of strangers to do it for them. So it could look like a number of things. I know we have had kiddos who have come and stayed for the whole ARD as young as 3rd grade. We've also had kids who have come only for the part that's really about the accommodations, where they can say, this is what helps me. Because if you just ask a kid what helps them, they can usually tell you. So it can look like a variety of things. There's no one way that would be, but there's no reason that they couldn't be involved prior to that. But that's just when we naturally start involving.
Well, we want to certainly thank Kelly and Bridget. This is great information, and the one thing that we all need to keep in mind is that we are all part of the educational team, and we need to work together and not against each other. And so, even though we may disagree, I like the color cards. That's a great idea. So, we do have to work together for the benefit of the child. So, we need to use honey, not things that are not pleasant. So, and I want to thank each of you for joining us tonight. I hope that you have found this to be helpful and informative. There will be a QR code or a link. There is so we ask that you complete our survey. That is very helpful to us as we move forward. It is a great way for us to know what the needs are of our parents, and so that's very, very helpful. We will have another community workshop the 1st of November, so watch out for that. If you have not friended the WT Center for Learning Disabilities on Facebook, we ask that you do that. And yes, that concludes our evening, and we thank everyone, and especially Kelly and Bridget. Thank you.